Hello everyone, here we have Mike's USA Fender Stratocaster. Now before anyone wants to kick my butt, I actually can't remember what model he called this one. So I'll declare that before I start. I know it's made in America, I know it's a Fender, and I know what he wants me to do with it. So you can put the name to it yourselves, but you can see it's got a kind of reverse bursty thing going on here. Blue and black, blue metallic by the looks of it to black, and it's got a two-post bridge and push-in arm, which we've got over there, and we've got jumbo-looking frets. But actually have an interesting quality to them. I don't know if you can probably see this on the video. You can see that the finish goes right up the side of the frets. Can you see it, how yellow it makes everything look? So there's the amber finish, and they've obviously taken the finish off the top. But I know that it I think it annoys Mike a bit, that finish. So hopefully we'll take more of that off in the leveling and polishing out process. So we're going to get rid of the bone nut because it's pinging like crazy, and we're going to go with a replacement tusk. Not going to change anything else other than tusk nut, very careful fret leveling. Oops, sorry, focus. Careful fret leveling, and we're going to put the tremolo down into down only position as opposed to this floating affair, so it won't feel like it's in use, full stop, unless he wants to put the arm in which case he can then bend it downwards. So the interesting thing about this finish that they do, first of all, I've said a number of times on various videos that as soon as I see a Fender maple neck these days, I just go into a cold panic, because it reminds me of a couple of times along the way where I've had Fenders with maple, USA Fenders I think, with maple necks, and they've shed their finish at the first kind of whiff of masking tape or basically anything else. So I'm hoping to goodness that that isn't one of them. And funny enough, I went to some quite lengths to explain to Mike that this is something that can happen, and of course it's really difficult because you don't want to frighten somebody, but you have to also be realistic and say, you know, out of 1,000 guitars or whatever, you know, it's happened at least twice. 2 on Fenders and 1 on a Gordon Smith actually, but you know, it can happen, and I think there must have been a batch of Fenders on a particular day or in a particular week or whatever that came out that way. So having kind of gone to that length to explain it to Mike, probably frightened him, and then I came away thinking, oh, should I have gone into that much detail about it? Because you can't avoid frightening somebody. You think their whole neck's going to fall apart. Then the next day on Facebook, on one of the, I don't know, what do they call it, amateur guitar building pages that I'm on, somebody showed a video of exactly the same happening on the back of a Fender neck. And I couldn't, I'm not sure I could work out which Fender it was. I think it was a USA Fender, and this person was obviously doing a bit of setup work, you know, maybe early days as a setter up, a guitar tech, but doing it for a customer, and they had hit this awful situation of the finish just falling off in clumps off the back, and I'm sure it came off with the masking tape, which any guitar finish should withstand unless it's kind of vintage and ancient. Anyway, so I'm sort of blethering here at this point, but I was sort of going to show you this finish. Can you see all those? This is a telltale sign. Even if I couldn't see the finish going up the side of the frets, you can tell by the way it has these little reflective dips, and so it's where the finish goes up the side, or it's like the frets aren't on top of it. The finish goes over the frets like a carpet, and it gives that telltale. You see how the shadows, there's a little line just before every fret, a little reflection and a little dark line, so it either dips down and then comes up, or it comes up to go over the fret. So you can see that is a telltale sign that even if you couldn't see any finish over the frets, you know straight away when you see this kind of reflection pattern, you can tell straight away that it's sprayed. The frets are put into the plain wood, and then the whole lot is sprayed, and then at the setup stage or whatever, they polish off the finish from the top of the frets. So it's a particular look, and I'm a stickler if I have an option or a choice in this. When I do a refret and somebody wants a maple board, there's a little blemish there. I much prefer to what's that? I much prefer to. Is that the No, I'm just looking at some sort of trilobite blemish. That is weird. Where did it go? Hang on, I'll find you again. I think I'll find you again. Oh, hellfire! There it is. Yeah. So when I do it, I tend to do it when the frets are out, and then finish the neck as a single flat surface. The difficult thing about that is that you have to keep cleaning the slots out between each coat of finish, but what you get is a mirror kind of consistent surface, and then you fret on top of that, and then you get a really nice clear straight flat surface between each fret. And also it means you can do your polishing and buffing before you put the frets in. Now that gives another challenge, which is how do you can you keep this beautifully polished fingerboard clean while you're fretting, and that's quite a challenge in itself. But I find it looks nicer than this slightly. You can see all those little shadows. It tells you that's been sprayed over. On top of the fact you can see all the finish climbing up the sides of the frets. Anyway, so we're going to just level this very slightly because we've got a bit of fret slap down here. This nut is the original bone nut. It's nicely fitted and everything, but it's pinging like crazy, and it's keeping this guitar well out of tune. Now, off camera, I've just done a tiny bit of work with the, sorry, it's really hard to see in this lighting, tiny bit of work with the knife, and I've just split the, scratched a line along the finish so that we can Dremel saw that out. For some reason, it's gone dark. Don't ask me why. Yeah. Can we get a better look at that? Can we? Heck. I can't hold this and do that at the same time. Yeah. Somebody's running a motorcycle out there. Okay, anyway, that's what we're going to do. Replace that with a Tusk one, do a little fret level, get it all nice and lovely, and set the tremolo down. So it's not a major, come on, get into focus, it's not a major deal, but I'm convinced that it's going to feel hugely different for Mike because it's going to play and stay in tune, which is the nice thing. We've got 9s on here, and fingers crossed, providing that none of this finish comes flying off in a Fender finish adhesion nightmare, then we'll be good, and we'll get rid of most of that material going up the sides of the frets too. One of the things I just wanted to try and show you on this neck as well is something to do with the way they then polish it. Look at how there are all these scratches going across. It's not very easy to see. I can see it with my plain eyes. See that scratch going, scratch there going that way across, and another one there going that way across. And there's quite a few of them on here, although I was trying not to be in focus. Yeah, all the way down, there are a few of these little scratches. I don't know really whether that's as a result of the buffing or something, but it's visible. So, okay, oops, I'm making something fall apart here. Forgive me. Don't want to turn that. All right, my camera work has gone completely off. So I'm going to just zoom out for a minute. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? Well, I think the first thing is I think I will set this down to lock it down. So let's get a, what's the right one? Maybe in a smaller one. let's get this back off, and then we'll screw in the tremolo claws. We talked a bit about the differences. You know, you can lock it down, but if you lock it down with a block of wood, then you are sort of stuck exactly, but you're committed to it not moving at all. If you use the springs to hold it strongly flat to the body, shall we say, then you can use the tremolo later if you feel like it without having to do any other setup work. So that's one possibility. The most complicated, in inverted commas, is the floating bridge, because if you have it floating, then if you decide later to lock it down or set it to down only or lock it off, then you have an action change issue which you have to overcome. Well, look at this. Even in the USA, it's nice. It's not. I don't think it's steel, and it's got a coating which makes it look like zinc alloy, but it actually is not. It's a steel bridge, and it's got a kind of, it's chamfered to, I suppose it's got enough mass. Maybe it's the same as they use on the made in Mexico's, but yeah, it's got a paint. It's got a grey paint underneath it. Underneath that matte grey paint is a shiny steel finish, which is a bit odd, really, isn't it? Right. So what I want for this is what are we looking at? We're looking at standard screwdriver bits. Now, so what I really want is, we've got this under tension as it is. I want to bring this back to horizontal. Now the problem is, unlike a 6-screw tremolo, this one might not sit flat. So we may, maybe a kind of two things involved in decking it. So what you don't want when you've chosen to have it decked is, you do want it to come back. You can hear it pinging. You do want it back, but that is flat. That's good. It can sit flat then. I was thinking if it was standing up a little taller on its posts, then you need to do some more adjustment to get it to sit flat, because otherwise, if it was already high up on its two posts, you'd end up with the back end of it locked down. God, this is such a bad design. I love these bridges generally. I think the design of where they put these screws in relation to the claw is diabolical. Right, we're pulling this down, and we want it to deck out. So it's only got 3 springs. Can you see? Yes. It's only got 3 springs. So the issue here is that you have to work really hard to get over the top of the tremolo claw whilst keeping the bit absolutely in the fitting, because it pushes you out of the way. The claw attachments push the screwdriver out of the way, and they sort of try and make it so that you end up scuffing it. And that's why most of these tremolo screws are 3/4 knackered by the time you get to them, because you never can get a head-on purchase on these thingies. That's a fraction off. So a couple more turns and we'll be there. Now I don't want it so much that it can't go down at all using the tremolo. I want it flat to begin with. So if I were to, I'm not going to push it all the way in, because it's very hard. That's practically there. Yeah, the palm won't get in the way of that. Okay, now it's obviously going to be detuned in the wrong direction. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do the nut. We might as well get started. So let's zoom this in a bit. What can we see? Oh yeah, let's work with the mirror. So I'm going to undo the strings. Now these are not locking tuners, but they've got the smallest amount of wire in them on the wound strings. So and that's okay. You know, that literally shows how little you need to put on to keep them on there. Obviously there's a bit more now going around on the plain strings because you need a bit more grip because they're slidey. I will still use a little more than this. I'm not sure it's quite enough for my peace of mind. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do. One is while the strings are off, I'm going to just gently tap them out of the way. Now this is where my nerves obviously come in, because first thing I'm thinking is, oh God, let's see, that string's come off there already. No, look, we're so close to the strings coming off. Let's just take this strings right out because there's no point keeping them on there. I usually usually try and keep them in there, but there's no point since they're so lightly held in. Right, strings off to one side. Yes, actual real blood. Okay, so we're going to get the Dremel thing and cut that out of there. Now, frankly, there's no where I can do a test to make sure this finish will stay on. It would be sort of good if I could, but there isn't such a place. So I'm going to have to just leave it to the very tiny, or very strong chance. Actually, what I'm wondering is, these marks where they've put a protector strip on there, it's sort of slightly annoying. They run parallel to the frets. And are they fixed distance either side of the frets? Not exactly. It seems to be there's two on every two on every fret up here, but then it goes down to one. It's almost as if, I don't know what it is, but it's made lots of little marks which are just slightly annoying. So straight away, while the strings are off, I'm going to just put the marker pen over these frets and it's need a steady hand. Now the thing about this is, I can't guarantee, because of the way they've sprayed this neck, I can't guarantee that I can get all of this amber finish out from the sides. Look at that, look at that. I'm dying. I can't guarantee I'm going to get all of this amber finish out from the sides of the frets. I could score along the edge with a knife, but honestly that will just flake off and you'll get a mess at some point. So I'm afraid, so that's the other thing. I'm going to just draw you a little picture a minute, because that's the other thing that I don't like about that method of finishing. So let's get two colours of things, 3 colours of things. So let's draw, where are we? Let's draw, this is Fender, okay? So we've got the neck, and then we've got the frets, and that's what Fender does. So it puts the frets onto, let's draw another one. This is what I prefer to do. So what Fender does is it does this. It sprays the finish on, and the finish goes, well, actually it goes all the way over the top, right? And that's what gives the sort of little funny reflections that we saw just a minute ago. So that's the Fender approach. The positive side of that for their manufacturing is it's quick. Tap in the frets on a plain wood, over the top, a bit of sanding off the top of the filing, or sanding off the top of the fret, a bit of buffing out, and everybody's happy. Except what we really get then is this. All right, as you can see, we get the top of the fret cleaned up, and what you will see then is we've actually got a gap where there's a break in the finish. Now, you know, with brittle finishes, if anything's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong down the edges here where it's already broken. Right? That's where it's likely to start to split. Equally, the last thing I want to do to try and clean this mess up is to cut into there to score it, to remove the stuff. I mean, it will come off, but what you've got then is a breakage down at the foot of the fret. So for the sake of the guitar, it's probably better that you have slightly amber frets than risking taking any more off, or risking bringing the damaged area down to the bottom of the fret. And that's all I can think of. Now what I would prefer to do is this. I put the finish directly on top of the board, right? And as a result, I can get, that's quite a nice layer. I get this lovely layer there, and all I have to do in that, to be honest, is I just have to bust me a little way through there and clean out the slots. And then I polish this and I buff this, right? So it's a beautiful, flat, even thing. There's no glints of waves of, you know, reflections. And then all I do then is I fret straight onto there, like so. And I know I've drawn these in more detail than I did on the other one, but you can see that the crown of the frets then sit beautifully firmly and smoothly on top of the finish. And so when the light hits it, it all looks, every bit of this looks as flat as every other bit. There's no curvy bits in the corners or anything. So that's why I like to do it that way. The downside is it takes a lot longer, because you build up your layers of finish and you have to clean those slots out between each layer. So as you put on more, you can't afford the slots to get clogged up, so you have to clean them out. It's actually not as hard as it sounds, but you can. I've done it by spray and I've done it by hand applied lacquer, and you can build up enough. You know, after every few coats, you just scrape out the slots. At the end, you also have to flat it down with sanding it back, but that's still fine because you go through the papers and then you end up with a buffing like that, and it's beautifully done. So that's what I prefer, and but you can see that it'll still take longer. Whichever way you cut or slice it, it's going to take longer to do it that way, and that's why Fender and other manufacturers put the frets in and spray right over the top. But it leaves me nervous because they've already broken their carpet at each fret. At the top of each fret there's a break, a split in that finish, so who knows whether that's going to come off or not. Now I'm going to make some noise, right? So there's noisy trigger warning, and I'm going to do something that may upset you. I'm going to cut off this nut very carefully. Now, we could be wearing a mask at that point, but it's okay. So because I'm cutting at a bit of an angle, because I can't get the Dremel any closer in. I can't get it straight down is what I mean. I have to go at an angle, so I've started near the back and coming towards the front. Now, eventually, you have to stop and think, okay, am I at my correct depth? And I just am at the depth there, and I am at the other side. And that's all you can really work off, is being at the depth. If you go a little further down in the middle, it's not the end of the world, because you, as long as the nut can sit on a flat surface underneath, it will sit fine. Now you can see that that's been painted in place as well, so it's a little bit, it's making another break, discontinuity. Now some people say things like, hey, you need to scour down, cut down the front edge of this. Now, the danger of doing that is if I do this with any blade, it actually does nothing. It looks good, and if anything, it's more than likely to end up causing chips than anything else. So I'm just doing it to the best of my ability, but I'm not 100% certain that it's really going to save it from any problems. So at the moment, this is coming apart, but it's not completely done. Again, I'm just cutting down the edge here, and it's nearly broken. That's off. So we can tap in the other direction. Get a little screwdriver and a little hammer. And again, it's just a gentle tap. We don't want to be bashing the living daylights out of it. Okay, so at the moment it's still firmly in its spot there. So the other thing I can do, I can work a bit more. I don't know where it's gone now. I can work a bit more with, that's weird. Oh, there it is. I can work a bit more with the Dremel, or I can get out something like this little, what's it called? Thingy saw, razor saw. Again, this is, again, if it's got a curved slot, then there's nothing you can do to prevent the thing from cutting into it. It's, you know, you may just at some point cut into the slot a little bit, but that, again, that's not the end of the world. As long as your new nut has a surface, overall good surface to sit on, you'll be fine, and it will be hidden, so you won't have to worry. But right at this point in time, I suspect that it's a flat slot, but I can't know for sure. So I'm just kind of working down to see a point where I can tap this edge. Starting to come out now. There we go. Okay, these bits are broken here. They're still fairly tightly fixed in, so we just have to be a little bit gentle with them. That one wants to come out. It's starting to rattle. You can be tempted to pull them out at this point, but I've done that in the past, and it can often take a little bit of the material, the wood behind, so we don't want chips of wood coming out. So I'd rather that we were properly cut like that. There we go. And that one's nearly there, but I think it probably needs a little bit more. Tiny bit of extra help there. Getting there. Eventually it comes out. Just like so. There we go. That is, do you know what? It's hard to tell. Is it curved or is it flat? It's slightly curved. Very slightly curved. It's a 9.5 inch radius, so you wouldn't really notice it too much. So there's the remains of the original nut. That's safely removed with no problems at all. There's a tiny little lip where the finish has sticking up a tiny bit, but that's not going to get in the way. It'll be butted up against the nut anyway, so we won't worry about that. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try out the new nut for size. Now this is fitting a solid tusk nut for me is a little bit harder than fitting an adjustable one, and the adjustable ones are great for me in many ways because they I can bring the nut up to the correct action, whereas with a solid fixed nut I have to work it down, measure the action, work it down from below, measure the action, and do it that way, which takes longer. But you know, it totally get it that at times, you know, it doesn't suit a customer to have an adjustable nut. Some people are just not comfortable with the look of it. But you know, I've used it because it's worked really well for me. But I totally accept that some people it isn't the kind of aesthetic they want. Now this nut comes with a little foot to make it work on a a straight slot. But this has got a curved slot, so we need to take this little foot out, and that's going to happen by virtue of a bit of Dremel work. So I'm just going to fit up. I need a new Dremel thing. Got to fit the Dremel thing. We call it a sanding drum. Fit a sanding drum if we can get the right size. That's too big. Fit a new sanding drum, and then we'll just very carefully remove that one. But these are actually quite difficult to fit and use. No, what am I looking at? I'm looking at a cross thing. Standard screwdriver head. So yeah, so we're going to basically get a new drum fitted. We'll shape the nut to its correct shape, and then we'll just work it down for size. So to get this off, I'm going to have to put this beastie in here and lock it in first, so that I can grab it with the screwdriver to undo it. And I find these are very effective, useful little things, these Dremel mandrels, but they're like nigh on impossible to get these what's-its off, no matter how much you undo them and try and release the tension on the rubber and so on. They just don't want to come off. So I'm going to see if I can get this one off manually. That's fine. Right, two of those. Now it's getting it off here that's the problem. We can try and cut it off. We can try and hold on and pull it off. Can we push it off? Is that another possibility? Well, it might be. Yikes. Quite difficult. Come on, push now, push now. So I was just listening to some comments and updates on, this is going to work, but I can't get a handle on it. Listening to some Ukraine updates, and I was very surprised to hear reports, and again these are all, we don't know how reliable they are, but to hear some reports suggesting that Belarus might be looking to disassociate with Russia, which is quite interesting, and would be quite significant. Sorry, I'm just trying to think, can we get this off? I may have to just try and cut this off, but that's not an easy thing to do. Yeah, so the word was that there was some signs that Lukashenko was, first of all, he was praising he was recorded praising the Ukrainian military for their resistance, which is without a doubt an unusual thing for a Putin ally to be doing. But somebody was saying that he's quite wily in the sense that he's known to move allegiances for his best, to stay in his best strategic position, kind of thing. So it may be that as simple as he maybe considers that Russia is on a losing hand for a lot of different reasons. So it may be that he's just wanting to distance himself if he thinks the Russians are not on playing a winning hand. So, but that would be, I mean, it would be smart politically because he could stave off the possible he could stave off some of the possible uprising because he's not hugely popular in Belarus. He's been ruling a bit by oppressive techniques, apparently. But anyway, the point is that it would be very interesting if he does distance himself from Russia. And then one of the people who was commenting on this, the commentator, said he couldn't imagine that they would actually split with Russia for the simple reason that Russia would send in a military operation to, sorry, you can't see anything, military operation into Belarus. And then I thought, well, actually, really, would they, given the state of attrition and the relative weakness and state of the losses that they've had so far? Maybe actually they're not even in a position to go into another country. That might be one thing way too far. Anyway, but it's just interesting to hear that coming up. So I'm just going to hold this and bring the piece to it so I can control it. Yep. So, yeah, interesting little development. Possibly not. It could be all bunkum for all we know. I mean, everything with a pinch of salt. So now it's a case of let's try this out for fit. Well, that's a nice fit already. I'll be careful I'll never get this out. So the issue here now is I need it loose enough to go in without getting caught on the side. So a tiny bit more removal from the front flat edge, which will just ease it up a bit. Now I can be sure that's going to sit in at its perfect height. Now the next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to be up and down with this sanding board for a minute, but I'm going to get let's get the two outer strings into play if I can. Now I want to keep these without breaking them because they're, when they get tangled, they're such a pain to work with. But they're good for the fret leveling. They're my sacrificial strings that are vital for that. Yeah, so who knows? We shall see whether that's the case. I mean, apparently they say that Lukashenko has in the past seen himself or tried to be a bit of a mediator in, I think they said in the situation with Georgia, he was played that role a bit, sort of self-appointed, but it wouldn't be a bad thing for him to do that. I don't like the look of the man for all kinds of reasons, but he's a bit of an autocrat, and anyway, whatever. I don't know too much about him except that I think he stole the election, didn't he? Apparently. Christ, another one. I hate working with these old strings like that. But okay, so now this is quite good. This feels like a potentially almost a drop in. That's now what I'm really concerned about at this point in time is the action. I think that's nigh on a drop in this case. I don't think I want to mess with the action at all. If I have to, I'll mess with the action a little bit later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restring this now, put it into playing, tune it up, get it into sort of playing mode, and then we'll do the fret leveling. And while I'm doing that, I will interrogate the nut height and be absolutely certain if it's exactly where I want it. Then I'll leave it there and we'll call it quits. Actually, in fact, the way it's fitting right now, we wouldn't even need to glue it in, which I would prefer not to do. There's no reason to glue a nut in place unless it's going to move. So if it's snug enough not to move, recommendation is don't glue it. The less glue you have clagging up your guitar in every which way, the better. So yes, so let's see what happens. I mean, you know, I'm wondering, I suppose that naively, there was a kind of glimmer of hope that somebody of Putin's ilk could be a better resource at getting Putin into an honourable withdrawal of some kind. Now I can't honestly see that happening because I can't see Putin being willing to go back to pre-invasion borders or any of that sort of malarkey, or far less, you know, compensate or reparate. Is that what they call it? Oh. Can't see that happening. But you never know. Somebody in between would be a useful thing. So I'm gradually working back up to where I want things. So let's assume my first fret action is good for now. I can interrogate it a bit later, and if I need to, I'll take a tiny bit off the bottom. But now what I want to concentrate on is getting my first fret action where I want it ready for the fret leveling. And this now is with the strings, with the thing, bridge plate, flat on the deck. So I'm looking for 1.5 and 1.2. So this is just a fraction high, and it's got the American, of course, it's got the American thing. 1.5. I had a comment from a YouTube viewer today saying, introducing himself, saying hello, and saying that he used this method, not my method, but this method, to level frets, and he's found it very successful, which is great. And he noted that he regularly got a last fret action of 1.2 millimeters on the low E and 1 on the high E, and he sort of asked me, did I ever go to that point? And the truth is, I can. Usually I've gone to that point on SGs, because SGs are surprisingly, they're cooperative when it comes to setting up the neck, because the bulk of the neck is outside of the body, the mass of the body. It seems that the neck tends to bend much more as one, maybe just because the truss rod is unencumbered and it does its thing the way it should. But it seems to be more likely that I get a ultra low action on an SG than any other type of guitar. And but I wouldn't be chasing it as a matter of course on any other, or all other guitars, because even if you can get them, and I've had a couple of guitars recently that will play, could play a very low action, but the problem is that you then become a victim to your own precision, because the action that you've set it at, whilst it can and will play, it's very intolerant of any atmospheric changes, or neck changes, for example. So the lower you set to begin with, the quicker a change in the shape of the neck due to the temperature or humidity, quicker that will rob you of the clearances you had, and then suddenly you'll be back into buzzing. So, tempting though it is to go for the lowest every time, I try to avoid doing that, because I don't want to do something that as soon as you send it away, it comes back. Somebody says the weather's changed, it's now gone to spring, 2 weeks later it's now buzzing, and I will be almost certain why it's buzzing, because it was too close to tolerance to begin with, and that's a downside of getting it that low. So hey, you can go where you want, but I wouldn't want to go too low. I would say this is running at about 0.5, half a mil. So we've got about 0.2 to take off altogether. Yeah, 0.5 is 0.6 really, but 0.6. If we call it 0.6, then we've got 0.3 to take off. 0.6 to 0.3 equals minus 0.3. So I can work that out once I've done the fret leveling. That's fine. I'll just take it off and I'll measure both ends of it, and then I'll just take it down until the measurement equals whatever it was minus 0.3. That's the simplest way of doing it accurately. Okay, so now we're into the fret leveling part of things, and one thing I haven't checked, and I will now check, is the neck relief. So the way I check the neck relief is dead simple, is to hold down the first, the string, the E string, on the first and last fret. I don't know what you're looking at there, I'm so sorry. Are you looking at a zoomed out view? Kind of. Hold down the one string, low E, on the first and last fret, and then around the middle of the neck, about here, look for any gap between the string and the fret underneath. Now here is a gap, and it's about 0.2. If you want to, you can put a capo on here. I'll show you how I do it. Capo on here, on the first fret, like so. That's one end held down on the first fret. Then you can hold this end down, like so. And then you can actually find out what it is by getting your thingamajig out. Now there's a 0.2, I reckon it's about 0.2, and I'm going to go the halfway point, which I just estimate is about there, and that's more than 0.2. So I always slightly underestimate when I'm guessing these, but it won't be as high as 0.4, I'm fairly sure. Well, it's about 0.4 a push. So what I'll do is I'm going to flatten this a tiny bit. So we look at this and we go, oh yeah, what hex key does this baby take? And now I'm not sure whether it's one of these. Feels like it. So the thing I was wanted to say to Mike is the secret of the neck adjustment. If you have too much curvature in your neck, you want to tighten the truss rod, and you tighten it by turning it clockwise. If the neck is too flat and you want to relax the neck to allow the strings to pull more curvature as you go counterclockwise. We're slightly too slightly too high, too much gap. So I'm doing a tiny tighten. You heard it kind of creak and shudder there. Now I did it about 10 degrees, something like that, of a circle. I don't know. I'm guessing. Sorry, where are we? But we can put the capo back on, and we can do the same measure again, and see where we're at. I want it to be a little lower. Now you can eyeball it, or you can go back and measure it again. That's about 0.2 now, so it's reduced it, and that is as simple as adjusting, difficult as it needs to be to adjust your truss rod. The secret of truss rods is they're there because you need to use them. There's too much fear talk about truss rods, and it's a lot as the result of people online, experts who frighten people away from using them, saying you can really damage your truss rod if you adjust it, if you're not careful. Honestly, it's a lot harder to damage your truss rod than that. You'd have to work quite hard to damage it. So the critical thing is, if I set this guitar up nice and low now, with as much of what I call the fret slap taken out of these bottom strings, these low strings particularly, that little bit of buzzing. Once I've done that very light bit of leveling, and we've got this playing as cleanly as we can at the low action that we've set, like I said, that's quite susceptible to maybe the neck flattening by the time it goes back into your air conditioning or your central heating or whatever, or your environment, your part of the country. So you need to be confident to do this thing, to get the capo, put it on the first fret like that, use the low E, hold down the low E string on the final fret, and just look for the gap at about the halfway point. Now, there's just three things to remember. Well, not even that. The answer to how much relief do I need, right? The answer is a tiny bit more than none, right? So what you absolutely can't have is a back bow, which is minus none. It's like no gap, actually negative, because the neck is sticking up. But if you just think about avoiding the string touching the metal, whether it's back bowed or just dead flat, you don't want it back bowed or dead flat. So you need a tiny bit more than none. And ideally that gap would be about 0.15 to 0.2 of a millimeter. And you can dial that in yourself at any time. And I recommend that you take the guitar that I've set up for you and you crank it one way until you see what that does to the action or to the playability that I've set for you, and then take it back to where I had it before, and you'll know that because A, it will be a tiny bit more than none, there will be a tiny gap here, and B, suddenly it'll play again beautifully. And you need to be confident doing that. You need to get out of your head this idea that you can damage that. The amount you'd have to adjust is never a complete turn of the truss rod. It might be 1/4 in total, if that. Very rarely any more than a quarter of a whole 360, or a 90-degree turn. Usually less than that in any direction. But if you just remember where you went, you can go straight back there. And there's nothing as valuable as knowing for yourself the feel and the way it changes, and not only the way it looks when you're measuring the gap like this, but also the way it changes how it feels, and how quickly it changes the way the guitar feels when you've opened up a bigger gap here by having more relief, or when you've brought it almost to flat. And you having a sense of how that feels in between will A, let you choose where you like it best, and B, it will tell you the limits of, or tell you in first-hand experience what having the neck dead flat means for playability, what having it with a little tiny bit of curve means. And nobody can really tell you that. You need to you need to find that out by doing, and that's why you must get into the habit of making adjustments to your truss rod. You can always go back to where it was just by remembering the exact, 1/4, 1/8, or whatever the turn was that you did with the key. You can't go wrong if you just keep track of, I turned it, 60 degrees, it's a little guess, you're going 30, 60, 90. As long as you keep track of what you're doing in that way, then you'll be fine. But definitely get comfortable doing it, because you will need to do it. And the worst thing will be that I set you a nice low action which you really enjoy playing for a while, and then suddenly maybe at the end of the summer the humidity and the heat changes, and then suddenly it changes the shape of the neck. Some necks are more susceptible to that than others, but if yours is, let's say, is very susceptible, and suddenly that tiny bit of clearance, because we're working with such tiny clearances, and you find that bit of clearance has been snaffled by the change in the wood, and then before you know it, it's buzzing again, and that's a disappointing thing. You don't want to be in that place. So I'm just doing a quick sort of run across the top of the frets to begin with, and what I'm kind of looking for at this stage is very, very little material. If they show up, or where they show up as silver and where they show up as being in any way flatter, is pretty much where they've been done in the factory or in the preparation, because we know that they've had the tops done to some degree, because it's taken the finish off, the amber clear finish. So this looks pretty good all round. There's a low fret here, there's a low one at the end here, but actually not a bad neck in terms of all over straightness, which is not hugely common. It's very often that there will be more patches of ups and downs than this. So I'm impressed with that. It's not a bad start, and I kind of can tell from that, or have a good idea that across the rest of this neck going this way, that will probably be the same all the way across. And my first thing is to test how each note plays as a note. Then I want to test out individual notes bending from the high E. You can hear that, for example, the high E on the 14th fret is choking out right there. Right? So if you see that, that's choking out sort of between the G and the D. Okay, so if I'm going to clear that up, so that we said 14 on the high E, choking out at this set action, well, we want that to be freed up. So wait till we come to the D, or the G and the D track with this leveling, and we'll work our way to free up those notes as we go. But I can't free them until we get to the G and the D track, and that's what this leveling process is very good for. So I'm moving across now into the B track, and kind of expecting to see something very similar, that most of the frets are pretty even with each other, but knowing there's probably one or two possible high frets, and low frets there. So that's more or less the same. The one that was showing up as low there is now okay, it's back in line with everything else. There's a couple of high spots there, one there, but that's fine. Just that little bit will make these play better. I'm just going to brush the dust off. Again, that's by my standards, by anyone's standards, that's very little removal of material. Now again, we won't expect to free that note up yet, because we're not across into the G and the D. Now, having done the B, I'm now going to recalibrate the beam, the banana, by recalibrate for the G track. And this track is really important, because it's where on any guitar, it's where the unevenness of the neck, the unevenness of the frets will show up as choked out notes. Now often really uneven frets will show up as buzzing or choked notes in certain places up the neck, but very often the place often the notes all play okay, but where you know there's unevenness is where you try and bend the high E and hear it choke out somewhere in the G and D tracks. So I know that I've recalibrated. I'm now going into the G track, and I'm really now looking to free up that high E bend. That's really important to me, and I know it's choking out up here, so already I'm sort of focusing a little bit more, and actually, if I'm honest, a little bit more of a push. I want to see that I've got all the frets okay. There's a couple of high frets here, but if you remember, the 14th fret was originally low. It was that one that was low, so the low fret makes the next one's high, so it could be that low spot on the 14th fret that is creating that difficulty bending. But with a bit of work on the G and D, as we saw, I should be able to free it up. There you go. See that? That has, you see, it's gone from choking out completely to rescuing that note, and that means we've made it play at the target action that I've set, not the one that the frets are going to dictate to me. Now I'm going to do a tiny bit more just to consolidate that a little bit more at this end of the neck. So when I say this end, I'm just holding at this end a little bit more than the other end, and I want that because as a guitarist I'm going to want bends that I can do without them choking out in the middle of a fabulous solo. The last thing you want is some sort of squawky thing that chokes off, literally. So now I'm going to calibrate for the D track, which possibly was the other place, but actually I'm thinking we've got that note freed up and this should be okay from here, but we'll do everything about the same. And what we'll be looking for on the last three frets, three strings, is I want to be quietening down what I call fret slap, which is when the thicker strings usually tend to run out of room. And that running out of room is caused usually by very tiny variations that we can't see in the straightness of the neck or the relative height of the frets. And it's very, very subtle, but it's just enough to cause a little bit of clipping, which you can usually spot it because it's a little sound that follows most of the notes in that part of the fretboard on that string, whereas high frets or low frets tend to be localized in one area or one place. So what I'm listening for is I just want as clean notes as possible on these wound strings now. That's pretty good. I'm going to go with that. I'm happy with that. I'm going to calibrate for the A. So if I once I get through here, if I have freed up the chokes on the bends at this chosen action, and if I have reduced the fret slap that usually accompanies these wound strings at the on the wound strings, then I will have improved this, and with the tusk nut there'll be no more pinging and the guitar will stay in tune. Once I've put on new strings and stretched them thoroughly, then that will be a transformation in how it stays in tune, and also I will ensure that I get the nut set to a lowest first fret action that we can get away with and have it play well. The reason why the first fret action is important is because if it's above about 0.5, and I prefer it below that, but if it's above about 0.5, it causes the notes played down here to go sharp, which sound terrible when you play them in line with, say for example, if you fret chords down here, if the first fret's too high, first fret action is too high, these fretted notes in the D chord will go slightly sharp, whereas these will be in tune with the tuner when you tuned everything up. But 3 strings will be out of tune slightly with 3 others, and it will sound horrible. So let me check A. Tiny bit from the 12th fret. So I'm going to give that another little go. Now the thing with fret slap is you have to be realistic and conservative a little bit. In other words, I have to know when it's time to stop and concede and raise the action slightly. If I can't, I guess what I'm saying is there's a sort of limitation that applies, that eventually you can keep on leveling and you won't get any returns out of it for the cost in fret metal. So that's quite a difficult call to make because it comes with experience. I know some people who do start doing this can not know when to concede. Okay, happier with that. They can not know and they can carry on, and with the result they take off too much fret metal without significantly improving the fret slap. So there are 1 or 2 things that can't be told and need to be learned through experience, really. And it's why I always recommend that people start practicing this method with some necks that they're not too bothered about, aren't too precious. Certainly don't do your first ever go on a USA Strat like this. If it's your first go, do it on a couple of Squires or an old Columbus or whatever you've got, or a Encore. Or Encore's great for it. You can actually get great fret leveling results out of the Encores, just to show you just how well they set up. Contrary to popular opinion about them, they're pretty good guitars generally. I mean, a bit bland in the pickup tone department, but that's kind of what you expect for the budget price. That's pretty good. Obviously, slightly out of tune. That's slipping, by the way. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm happy with that. That's got where I wanted to go. So general verdict on that neck is a good quality neck with relatively little required to get it to where I wanted it. Yeah, not bad. Now I'm approaching the terror zone for me, which is I know that I'm going to take 0.3 millimeters off this nut in a separate operation. I'm going to ditch these strings now, and I'm going to mask off the fretboard. Now the thing is, I can't be timid about this. I know I've had 2 in 1,000 occasions when this finish problem has happened, but I still dread it. So I'm going to go ahead as if I don't dread it, because otherwise I'll just be living in abject fear, and that's not a great way to live. As I told my friend Mr. Vladimir Vladimirovich when he started threatening me with his nuclear bombs. There's nothing to fear but fear itself, somebody once said. I think they were right about that. I think that's also, if I read correctly from the stories I've read, it's what most people who've seen active combat duty have said, is that at a point they fear when they're sitting around up to a point thinking about things and waiting. But when things kick off, many people report losing the fearfulness that actually many of us live under a lot of the time when we're not in those extreme situations, because there's nothing to push us over into just doing. But I've been thinking a lot about the bind that, or the hold that Putin has on Western people and or politicians. Right, so we are going for let's do it in millimeters. Right, what I'm doing is I'm going into the notch as far as it will go. At the notch, I'm measuring 3.92. I'll come back to my thought about Vladimir and the fear factor. 0.3. 3.92, did I say? 3.92. That end, and this end will be less because you can get the tip further into the slot, so it will come out as 3.51, sort of 3.51. And we want to take 0.3 off each of those. Let's just check that. 3.92 again. It's almost the thing goes. Right, let's calling it 3.95. 3.95. We're going to take 0.3 minus 0.3 equals 3.65, and on this side equals 3.2. Let's call it 3.20. So that's what I'm aiming to do. So I have to be. We're taking 0.3 off both sides, so it's an even. It's a uniform sanding job. Now I'm going to use one of Bob's pieces again. This is a 9.5 block, and it's the only real way with a curved base that I can remove material. So that's an interesting thing, because I can't really do it any other way other than cutting the slots down. So I'm going to start by working it on this block, and it's a bit mucky, so I'll have to clean it off afterwards. Now I know that it comes with this, there are in here, in the kit, which should be here somewhere, there we go, in the kit here is a block Bob designed for holding it, which has a 9.5 radius already built onto it. But what we sort of want to do is we want to stagger it like that. Whoops, that's not so clever. So what I'm going to do is get the right hex key thing for a minute. Get there. Which one's that one going to be? That one probably. Yep. Okay, so the idea is I'm going to balance this up. Screw these things in. Bring these together. Come along. Right. So this spacer thing isn't strictly necessary, but I guess it's going to help me gauge when to put this in. So I put this in like that, which now has a very small amount sticking out, and I'm going to attempt to do those up without it moving. Obviously not like that. And then do a bit more on that side. So theoretically, at some point we might be able to lock this in place. I think I'm probably using this slightly wrong, but the idea would be we get this just fractionally above the line. I'm not managing to keep things in place very well. Holy cow. Something like that. If we get both of these in place, that feels about right. Now I'm going to lock them in place. So now, theoretically, I can take this thing here and I can take some material off. Now my only problem with this is, of course, I have to slack it off to measure to see what effect it's had. So everything falls apart again, and I go to 0, reset, and then I go to 3.9. So I've still got more to go. So I could do it by hand, which is like so, but as you can see, it sort of does it, but I can't really retain much grip on it. So it falls off. And if I can just about get a good grip on it, I might be able to, might be easier for now. But I also have to make sure that I'm keeping a right-angled bottom to the nut in relation to the front face. So we have 3.89 going down slowly, 3.47, so still more to go. The alternative way is to kind of work it backwards and forwards over this direction. Still the same radius curve, might be more effective at taking some material away, except when you slip like that. 3.8 still, 3.4. So we're about 0.2 off each side, each of them. But you know, it's a great little tool, and it's worth sticking with because you get there in the end. And like I say, if you were to just hold that in place like that and run backwards and forwards, that's a fairly even sanding. This sandpaper is what I've put on myself with double-sided tape. So if it's getting tired, I can always put a new piece on to speed things up. 3.8 still, it's not really taking much off there at all. 3.42, again about the same. So side to side isn't doing much. So, you know, just time consuming. What was that noise out there? See if there are any intruders. 3.24. Oh, we're almost on the mark. And on this one, 3.87. That's funny that the doesn't appear to be taking down one side compared to the other. So I'm going to give one side a bit more of a push. See if we can get there. 3.68. Yeah, we're about there. 3.39. Tiny little bit. Either way. Difficult to handle little pieces like this, but so we have 3.7. I think that's going to be close enough for my liking. 3.2-ish. I think we're almost there. Yeah, I reckon so. Let's do it. Thank you, bits, even though I didn't quite use you in some of the manner which you were intended. Right, well, I won't put that on because we'll save that to once I've done the polishing. So now we're at the scary polishing stage, and this is where we just have to go for it. If this is going to fall to pieces, it's going to fall to pieces. It's the lightest, low-tackest of the papers I can possibly get. The only thing I can do to limit, if it is going to pull apart, the only thing I can limit the damage is by perhaps just only slightly folding over the end and not going round and doubling it round the back, which is what makes it easier. But if we just do it this way, it should be all right. Because I don't need to lock it off at the back, other than on this piece here. So I'm putting the paper on first, and that involves using some pieces I've cut before to cut them down to size, because obviously the frets get closer together, so I need thinner and thinner strips of paper. So I have a board where I cut them out. So now I can't use these, so I'm going to use smaller stuff. And this is probably a bit stickier, so I can try and de-stickify it a little bit by getting some fuzz on it, but we'll just do the best we can. Yeah, so before I'll do the polishing part off camera because it's noisy and I can make a cup of tea. But before I do that, what I'll do is I will, now that I'm getting the masking tape on, I will re-profile or re-crown the frets. And the reason I left, normally I'll do that on a rosewood neck, I'll do that before I put the masking tape on, but on a maple one, it's much more susceptible to marks, so I like to put this on first before I do the recrowning. The recrowning is about taking the flattened shape, or to a degree it will be slightly flattened, it won't be massively flattened, but to have made it level we'll have put a little bit of a flat spot on each of these frets, and what we do is we reshape the fret that's left without reducing its height. So we use the height, its current level height, as a kind of limit, and then we reshape the rest of the fret to put it back into an arch shaped thing, which is how the fret's meant to be. So the string sits perfectly on the top rather than at the front of a flat spot, which is what happens if you don't recrown frets. So this bit of masking off takes a fair amount of time because it's critical to keep the board protected. You can use things like fret protector strips, but I have to say I don't find them effective, even when you have a situation where if you're absolutely certain that the finish could flake off. The fret protector, it's a piece of metal, you have to hold it in place, it has to touch and rest quite hard on the finish, and there's absolutely no guarantee it even stays in place. And the problem with that is that if you use a fret protector, you can't really go through the full sequence of sandpapers that I go through to polish out, because it would take too long. You'd be there for weeks trying to do that. If I go through, what about 13 grades of paper or something for each fret in this method. If I tried to do 13 different grades on each fret before moving on to the next one, can you imagine how long that would take? Well, I guess it would take 22 times longer, which it takes about half an hour, so that, I'm sure it wouldn't be 11 hours, but it would be a lot longer, noticeably longer, and I just don't think it's feasible. So when I am nearly down to the right size here, I'm running out of I'm going to require smaller, thinner strips. I'll get those from my pre-cut board, and we'll kind of run those to the end. And we have to pick the right width pieces from the board. So this is back to the low-tack stuff again. Yeah, so fear is an amazing thing, and when you're in this situation, I've been observing the degree to which Putin uses fear. Now, my interest in this, the Russian use of fear, I suppose, if you could put it that simply, goes hand in hand with my interest in Soviet Russian history, really. And it's, you only have to read a bit of a fairly light cursory reading of Soviet history from the revolution through into the 50s, or 30s, 40s and 50s, and even onwards, but anywhere between the revolution and now, October Revolution. But to see that fear is a pervasive currency in Soviet Russian politics, or culture, actually. And what's really interesting in looking at this conflict is the Poles, the Ukrainians and the Lithuanians and the Moldovans know it, because they've lived it. They've been part of it at one point, and they've come out of it, and they don't want any more of it. But the British have never lived in the Great Terror. They've done bad things, and we've had bad times. But the British have never lived in a terror coming anywhere close to what Russia has gone through, decade after decade after decade across the last 100 years. And so the British politicians just don't seem to recognise, maybe they do, but they don't appear to recognise the degree to which they are incapacitated by fear, and the degree to which Putin knows this. Sorry, I left you in a boring view. I should sack myself as a camera person. I bet you're half zoomed in as well. Let me double check. I bet you are. I have not been looking. I've been lapsed. I can go to the overhead camera. I've actually been fairly zoomed out. So the British politicians, they sort of talk in this. They're stuck in their own paradigm of decency and fair play and logic and all those things that we're kind of used to, and they don't seem to have any understanding that Putin runs on raw fear, and has always done, in the way that Russia has always run on that, and it's incredibly pervasive, and his success at the moment is not that he's making a mess militarily and so on, but his success as Hitler is the same as Hitler's was, in that he has, up to a point, he has successfully amplified all the individual peoples of the West, most of the individual peoples of the West. He has amplified, he has grown their fear of the nuclear showdown into such a monster that he's conducted himself in this bullying way that he's the only person that can put a red line down. So, for example, don't you dare throw a mortar over into Russian territory, Ukraine. There will be terrible reprisals if you do. Wait a minute, this is the country that's just invaded and destroyed about a third of the whole of Ukraine, telling the person they're at war with not to throw a stone back over the border. That's insane. But he gets away with it because he has the psychological upper hand, not so much with the Slavic nations, but definitely with the British, the softer Western nations, if you like, the liberal Western nations. And so I've been really interested to see how the bully works on growing your fear. That's why bullies. This idea that people calling you names at school is bullying. You know, yes, to a degree it makes you feel bad, and and people can be cruel and heartless and can undermine you, and to the point where you don't want to live. And I'm not saying it's not a serious thing when people are cruel to you and cruel to kids at school. It's serious, but it's a very different meaning of the expression. It's a completely different usage of the term bullying. The key thing about bullying is when somebody harnesses your fear of them and puts it to work and revels in it. Maybe enjoys it because it gives them the thrill of power, or just uses it to get what they want. Maybe doesn't get any thrill of power, doesn't really even notice you really, except insofar as it knows how to make you do what it wants. By the way, these little crunchy bits coming off here, this is the finish coming off the side of the actually I might show you. That's the finish. The crowning tool is pulling off, which is good, pulling off some of that amber finish. That's what's leaving that there. Anyway, yeah, so the true bully, the Putin style bully, is harnessing and maximizing and capitalizing our fear. And of course the Western fear is yes, we're afraid of being in a world or a European conflict, but really the truth is we're not frightened as long as we've got at least a good military chance. And usually we're not frightened because we've got the Americans with us, and and we've got some pretty good weaponry and well-trained soldiers, even if there aren't many of them. But the true fear in this situation obviously comes because Putin heads up the nation with the biggest nuclear arsenal of the lot, and actually also before the Ukraine adventure, I think we also believed that he headed up the second greatest army in the world, which of course, having defeated the Nazis in the Second World War, could be capable of marching across the whole of Western Europe and taking it in an afternoon. And I think we sort of took that at face value, because they've been threatening it for the longest while. And actually, Putin's genius, in inverted commas, is his reckoning of how far he can punch you whilst ensuring your terror of his big weapon stops you from hitting him back at all. Now, the thing that's totally caught him is that I think people say that the thing that's caught him out is the incredible patriotism and bravery of the Ukrainians, and I totally agree. They are patriotic and have been incredibly brave. But I think the thing he misunderstood is once you've started fighting with someone, gets back to the point I was talking about a minute ago, or a while ago. Once you invade somebody and you start killing their citizens, they're not afraid of a nuclear bomb anymore. You're coming across their country, murdering their people, shooting them in the back, bombing their cities, razing them to the ground. The thing you've made a mistake on is that you've suddenly lost the thing you had, an advantage when you were the bully and controlling them with their fear. And I don't think he was probably ever controlling Ukraine with their fear, but I certainly believe he's been controlling the West, or dictating the conversation with the West, if you like, based on our fear of nuclear escalation. But the thing that he's miscalculated is that when you invade a country like Ukraine, and actually it would be the same in Britain, do you think any of us would be worried now about nuclear war if we were in exactly the same position that Ukraine was in, i.e. with an invader on our territory trying to wipe us out? We would be forced into the position the Ukrainians are in. We would be fighting with everything we had. And actually, once you're facing bombs from the sky, cruise missiles, thermobaric weapons, God knows what else. Actually, it doesn't really matter if it comes in the form of a nuclear explosion or it comes in the form of a Kalashnikov bullet. Once you've overcome your fear of picking up that weapon and defending your country, you're not going to be afraid. And then the bully loses the magic is, spell is broken. And I think that's the bit he has misunderstood. And the reason bullies always misunderstand that is because they are a bully, always a bully until they're not. In other words, there's only ever one point where they get taught the lesson. So they're a bully up to the point, finally, where somebody has nothing to lose and fights back. And up till now, Russia hasn't really pushed anyone to that place, and they've done it with the Ukrainians. And I think that's the big mistake. And yes, I think the Ukrainians are funny people. Funny. They've got a good sense of humour from what I've seen. They're courageous. They're positive. They're very witty and smart with their PR and all the propaganda, whatever you want to call it. But so would the old Tommy be if we were back in, if the minute the fear vanishes and we have to face it, then suddenly you'd see the same grit and courage. And of course, it's what the old folks in Britain always look back to. It's when the paralysing fear it was too late to hold on to the paralysing fear. Then you get the best out of the people, or you see their courage. Am I being rained on? I think I am. Anyway, that's just something I've been looking at and thinking. So, of course, there's still a chance that he's going to pull the old nuclear thing, but actually, it's like that. I don't want to be. I personally don't want to live my life cowering from this craven bully who's committing mass murder and killing civilians and destroying culture and destroying the planet with all that filth and weapons, expended weaponry, all the crap that this is putting out, all of the wasted lives and all of that stuff wasted. It's a disaster, and I don't want to be. I don't want to be cowering in fear of what he might do, so much that I allow him to carry on what he already is doing. So anyway, that's where I've got to on the subject. I'm going to stop and take a coffee break, something like that. And then next step, I'll come back when this is polished out, and then pretty much we'll be in the restring, fit the nut restring. And I'll say one thing before I come back, or before we go on to the next bit. Tuning stability on your guitar, it comes down to two things I found, and two things only, amazingly. First one is the nut. So if you won't believe how big a part the nut plays in your guitar going out of tune, and Mike's nut on this, even though it's done by Fender in the factory and it's made of bone and it's as perfectly well cut as they could do it, that nut was pinging and holding onto the strings. That pinging is enough, or it's evidence that your nut will be holding the strings at uneven pressures across the nut, and that will make sure it goes out of tune constantly. Right? It will never stay in tune as long as it's gripping and pinging. So the way to get rid of that is to fit a quality material like Tusk is unbeatable. It's pre-lubricated, the Teflon based or the PTFE based one. The Tusk XL is unbeatable for its self-lubricated thing. It's don't worry about it sounding better than bone. You couldn't tell the difference. It's all about the freedom of movement of the strings through the slots. So to get the right material, to get it to the right height, which we've done, that's half of your tuning problems taken care of right there. The other half is when you fit new strings, as you see in a minute, stretch the living daylights out of them until you think it's ridiculous. Sometimes you could stretch 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get all of the stretch out. Once you've done that, it will reward you in conjunction with a nut, in combination with a nut, it will reward you with staying in tune almost all the time. It will feel like a completely different guitar because always, it just suddenly you won't have that fight feeling. It's not fighting you anymore. It'll just be in tune when you want it. You'll take it off the peg, maybe a tiny tweak, and then it will be in tune. It will go into tune. There'll be no, well, it doesn't seem to be doing anything when I turn one way or another, which is what you get when it's holding onto the string in the nut. It'll go into tune easily, and then it will seem to stay in tune most of the session you're playing with it. And that's why you'll keep going back to the one that is in tune and stays in tune. So that's a critical part of it. And guess what? It's got nothing to do with the tuners. The tuners only, better or worse tuners, only have an impact insofar as they change the smoothness and precision of the tuning operation. And that's a perfectly good reason to have good quality tuners like these Fender ones. There's nothing wrong with these. They're great. They're very smooth. They've got a high gearing ratio, and they feel direct and nice and smooth to operate. And the quality looks good, and so on. And so aesthetics and smoothness of engineering and operation are pretty good reasons to upgrade your tuners. But if you're struggling with tuning stability, don't waste your money upgrading your tuners to try and fix that, because they won't do it. People spend money on it and then come back and say, oh, that's fixed my tuning problem. I don't believe it. I guarantee it's not. I've never seen a tuner that was responsible for the guitar going out of tune. You can sometimes thread it wrong, like I had there when I put this very limited bit of string back through, because Mike has already put very little string on there. That didn't help, and it was, as I said a bit earlier, that was just going out of tune continually because it was sliding back. That aside, once you've got enough on the peg to hold it, it won't ever pull backwards. Okay, so I'm going for my tea break. I'll see you after this is polished out. Here we are, ready to go. We've got the frets done, a lot less amber going on around there. It's still a little bit going up the sides, but nothing compared to what it was. We've got the nut on here. I think that's pretty tight. I think we should leave it where it is. So the next thing to do, well, pardon me, we will, let's have a zoom out for a minute, and I'll get the strings loaded up. We'll be ready to rumble. Now, I can't remember. I think Mike said something about, and my memory's gone here, something about there being some plastic trapped under the knobs, but I left the knob puller at home because I just got a new one in since I lost my other one somewhere in this workshop, but I cannot find it. So I got another one, because when you can't find something, there's just no point in struggling. Anyway, got another one, and I will take the knobs off at home and check. Just make sure there is no more. Hang on a minute. There it is. Yeah, make sure there's no plastic caught under there. I couldn't hear it scrunching, but with the knob puller I shall be able to make sure of it. Anyway, so we are in the sort of last bit here, which is getting the strings on, and then we'll get them loaded onto the tuners, and then we will stretch them out and then check the intonation once they're stretched, and that will be everything. So the good thing about setting it up like this is it does it in stages. You know, get the sort of get everything right as you go along. So the precision fret leveling part is done already, so we don't have to worry about that. The action is set at our chosen low target. And what I'm just going to do is get all the tuners lined up in the right direction, so everything's easy to wind on. Well, the good thing about Tusk is that they do make their replacement nuts fit the US model Strat. That's what they've obviously aimed it at, and it doesn't fit all types of Strat, so we've clearly gone for the one and one only. So the way I do this, I don't know if you can see, let's zoom in, hold on a second, get out of the way. That's it. Okay, this is how I do it. Like, I think I feel happier putting a little bit more on. So I go right to the end, pull all the way through, and then I grab here and pull back 1 fret's worth, and I start winding from there. Hold the tight one, let the loose one go under the held one. As the loose one comes round, yank it up and push the held one under the loose one, and that kind of locks it off, and then we just snip off the excesses on both cases, right flush, so there doesn't need to be any knots tied anywhere or any of that stuff going on. So I find that is just enough to make stretching the strings out easy enough, and certainly enough to hold even the plain strings. Right, so yeah, next stage it will be the stretching, and I did once find, I think I bought as a gimmicky thing, I bought a string stretcher plastic thing, and I used it for about 3 times. I had to kind of force myself to use it since I'd bought it, but I didn't like it, and the reason I didn't like it is I broke more strings stretching strings that way. And the reason I broke more strings is that because it's plastic and it's not your fingers, I couldn't really tell how hard I was pulling them or pushing them or whatever. So I broke more strings, and I just didn't like the fact I couldn't feel what I was doing. And I know that stretching the strings with regular old-fashioned fingers it can be tiring, but I think I prefer doing that to using a plastic tool. Okay, final one. So pull it through, pull it tight, pull it back 1 fret's worth, and go. Now on the plain strings that tends to go a bit more than twice on the thing, but that's fine. Okay, so once that's done, I need a bit of a zoom out, don't I? Sorry. Thank you. Once that's done, I tend to give everything a stretch to make sure it's bedded in, in. And then I go for a first tune-up, just to get it to pitch. Okay, so the stretching game, well, let's just do a check. So I want to check my playing action. Yep, good over the first fret, nice and low down here, everything relative to everything else, pretty good. Yep, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each string in turn, and I'm going to stretch between thumb and forefinger pretty hard right the way down the fingerboard, or sorry, down the string. And that will squeeze out some more slack, and then when I get there we'll see it detunes, and then the idea is to keep going doing this until it stops detuning, because then we'll be pretty much at stable tuning, and that will be it. So that was how much we squeezed out in the first go. Now we do a second go. And a third go if necessary, but we'll see. Of course, we really want to be stretching these bits behind here as well, without breaking them if we can help it. So I had a Saturday mostly in the hammock, in between clearing out the shed and getting rid of a load of cardboard that I can't use in guitar courier packages, and digging our way through to our drop stitch canoe, which is finally time to see the light of day. So we're nearly there. I think just a few bends and that will get it stable. That's pretty good. Right, that's it. That's that bit done. So now what I'm going to do is just get the lead and we'll intonate, we'll check the intonation, and make sure that's good. And once we've done that, we will be into putting the back plate on and we're finished. And Mike's coming to get this tomorrow. So, whoops, sorry. So that's good. Perfectly timed. My birthday tomorrow. 59. Bit flat. Not sure about the B. Yeah, all pretty good. Pretty good, actually. Spot on. There we are. So, sorry, noise. Trigger alert, loud noise after it happened. Okay, so that's that done. Everything nice and clean. Get the last fingerprints off. Black pick guards and gloss finishes are always hard to keep clean, but I'm happy. Nice bird's eye finish on the back of the neck there. Okay, so we have, put the back on, and I'll double check the relief one more time. I'm thinking it's going to be fine. These are fractionally too small for that bit. Okay. Torque right down to 1. So it will click it early with the least amount of force. Okay, just a quick check on the relief. Yep, good. Fab, that's really great, and it's cleaned up all of most, if not all of that horrible amber stuff on the frets, so they look a load cleaner, and everything is the way it should be. So I am going to finish up there, and thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. I hope that was useful, and yeah, see you on the next one.